this isn't going to happen in a few months. It's going to take years and years and years to effectively build and scale an organization, especially as you're bringing on employees. What's up, everybody? Mason and Dan here, and today we are going to get to speak about one of my favorite topics, which is just management of employees and leadership. It's just Dan and myself on the show today, and it's something that we've both had successes and failures in managing employees, from Dan doing it at a young age, involved in multiple businesses as he was growing up, myself in the corporate world managing hundreds of employees, and moving into the entrepreneurial space where we only have a couple employees. So we're going to kind of walk you through the entire employee management cycle, from hiring to firing and managing effectively. But before we get into that, Dan, how are you doing?
Mason, yeah, I'm great. I'm out in California. I rented out my house in Colorado and am enjoying the sun and the ocean, although the marine layer is still here, so it's cloudy at the moment, but it's only 9 a.m., so it'll be sunny shortly enough.
Oh, yeah, and we have a cold spell in Colorado right now. It's June 19th as we're recording this, and I think it's 50 degrees and raining outside right now, which is welcome after the heat. But yeah, I can tell that you're in an Airbnb and not your office, with your super cool background with an outlet in it, for everyone that's not watching on YouTube right now. But yeah, Dan, let's kind of get started with where... And I feel like the focus of this, while it will be applicable to those in the corporate world or those that are hiring outside labor for their organization, whether a contract employee or a general contractor to build a house, all of this applies. But starting off at the very beginning of, you're a solo entrepreneur, you feel like you're the reason that your organization can't grow because there's just not enough manpower. How do you really determine when it's time to bring on your first hire and who that should really be?
Yeah, two great questions. And to everyone out there who's in that position, I was talking to one of our mutual friends about this recently. He had been putting off hiring for years because he didn't feel ready. And unfortunately, you're never going to feel ready. I was so uncomfortable when I hired my first acquisition person. So I really don't know anyone who has felt ready, but I think what you should look for is where growth is being stymied because you're serving all the roles, and you could be making more money if you outsourced or hired someone for one of the functions of your business, so that you could spend more time on revenue generating activities. Which takes us to your second question of who should your first hire be. It should be the lower dollar per hour tasks. So, within the context of what Mason and I are doing, probably shouldn't do what I did, where you hire an acquisition manager first, because that's the most essential thing to closing deals and making money. Maybe a transaction coordinator. But Mason, what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that it's extraordinarily uncomfortable hiring someone. A lot of people don't even know where to start of, okay, I want to bring someone on. I want to bring on a W-2 employee and have them salary full-time. And to your point of examining the organization and looking at what are the quote-unquote lower dollar per hour tasks that are required to get done, from bookkeeping to accounting. And the beautiful thing about, and speaking to bookkeeping and accounting, they know the processes related to how do you pay people, how do you do all this stuff, how do you categorize all these transactions. And I think that if you look at accounting, bookkeeping, transaction coordination, more administrative related tasks, it's really great because you can hire these people on a contractor basis, or a 1099 is what we call these types of employees, where you're not paying their benefits, they're not on salary, you have an agreed upon either fee for service or hourly rate that you're able to bring them on. And it's really simple because it's low stakes, where it's okay, if you hire, say, a virtual assistant, and sometimes they're international virtual assistants where you could be paying anywhere from $2 to $15 an hour for college-educated people that can do a really good job, using services like Upwork or Fiverr to bring these people on into the organization and have them do those lower dollar per hour tasks. It's a really great runway into getting comfortable with employee management and just hiring and paying people out because the stakes are so low.
Yeah, those are great points there. and it's almost training wheels for having real employees, which I think is the great way to think about it. And one thought I had while you were talking there, where a limiting belief I had, and I've heard echoed from a lot of people within our space looking to hire, is, oh, nobody's going to work on just commission. As far as the acquisitions role, well, that is not correct. The first several acquisition managers I had were entirely on commission. I know you have guys just on commission now, so just want to throw that out there that it's not true. You absolutely can hire people without a base if they're the right personality.
Absolutely. And I mean, go onto Facebook groups of, we live in Colorado Springs, job opportunities in Colorado Springs, and see how many people are looking for remote hourly work because they want to get paid right away. And people want to work from home. And especially if you're hiring these lower dollar per hour tasks or even higher dollar per hour tasks where it's a sales position, you're able to work remotely and from home. There are so many people in this world that are looking for part-time work or full-time work in this capacity. So don't limit yourself, as Dan is saying, on whatever your assumptions of what people would love to do. I think that, I mean, I drove for Uber in grad school, and it's almost the same thing, except I could make a lot more money doing random tasks. And I was constantly looking for data entry jobs and different things like that. There's a plethora of people out there, so don't let your assumptions get in the way of that. But I think we should spend a little more time on beyond the potentially contractor, the 1099, the lower dollar per ask or hour tasks, looking at making a first hire of where the true constraints are in your business. So in our business, obviously, sales or acquisitions is one of the most important roles. And you and I both hired full-time and part-time acquisition managers. And we maybe have some regrets of the timing of when we brought them on compared to when we brought other people on. But Dan, whenever you're examining yourself and your business, how do you feel like you actually identify those constraints in it? Like, how do you find the bottleneck when that's holding you back from growth?
Yeah, I was just going through this recently in my head, and so I'm glad you bring this up. And really, just whether you physically write this out on paper or do it in your head, I look at each stage of the business. And so again, using the land acquisition and resale business that Mason and I have, it's really simple. You pull the data up front, you market to those owners in a variety of ways, and you need people to take those leads in, close the ones that are good, and then you need someone to resell, right? And of course, in the middle there, you need a title company, which are endless, so that's not even worth discussing, and you need the funds to close the deals. And so thinking through all those stages, well, data's not an issue, right? I can pull 10,000 a month on PropStream, which I usually either max out or exceed, but it's very cheap to buy more, so that's not a constraint. Sending the marketing, that's the most expensive overhead I have, but we're doing well. I can ramp that up. And after that, it's the labor, the skilled salespeople to close those deals. And for me, just kind of getting ahead here, that's been my biggest constraint, where I have failed multiple times hiring effectively. And so that has for sure been the biggest bottleneck, because with what Mason and I are doing, I have plenty of capital available to my business, which would be the next potential constraint. And then, of course, on the resale side, just using realtors, that's not a problem. There's endless realtors available. So that's how I would do it. I would lay out your business on paper or in your head, however you think, and just look, okay, can I do more of this? I can do more marketing. Okay, great. Well, who's going to handle those leads? Is that the constraint? Is it the funds to close those leads? Where am I constrained? And for me, it's entirely been hiring competent, reliable acquisition managers.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And to clarify and get very specific and tangible with what Dan is saying there, of you have to understand the process flow of what your business is, where Dan's talking about from market selection all the way to disposition of our which is what's applicable in our business, of take construction paper, do it on a whiteboard. There's plenty of software out there. Get a sheet of butcher paper that is 50 feet long and start at the absolute very beginning of whatever your business is. and walk through every single stage, every single step, and draw the process flow map and have the branches of where it goes and how much time it takes. And I think something that we can both agree on is don't delegate or abdicate the responsibilities if you are building a business too soon, because you need to understand actually how much time it does take. And the beauty of being able to hire people that are specific to whatever tasks or steps within the process of the business will do for you is you might think it takes 5 hours to pull a marketing list. And then you hire someone that's an expert at pulling marketing lists. That's all they do all day. And it takes them 1 hour to do it. And so you're able to start seeing these constraints that Dan spoke about of, is it time? Is it capital? Is it people? Is it systems? Is it software? And a lot of the times it might not be what you think. And I think, Dan, you mentioned it, of one of the greatest overheads in this business is marketing. And you don't want to, at the beginning, whenever you're looking to hire your first employee, as you're examining all these processes, you don't want to bring in so much overhead that you're unable to actually pay for what you need. You might not need to hire a transaction coordinator and an admin assistant and a marketing list person and all these different things. And then you look at your cash flow and your capital available, and you're not able to actually pay for what's going to be generating income. So to kind of summarize there, map out your entire business, figure out the constraints where, okay, I don't have enough time or resources available to do this. And also kind of examine yourself personally. If you're killing it at sales and you're really good at sales, even if it makes you uncomfortable, stay in sales, because that's income generating. If you're really good at other tasks that are lower income generating, maybe take a look in the mirror and say, okay, what should my role in this organization be? But I think this kind of moves us along into the next point, where we can kind of focus this conversation outside of primarily just hiring contractors and contract laborers, but actually bringing on an employee, salary or salary plus commission, full-time employee. What do you do? I mean, you post the job, you can post it on Indeed, you can post it on LinkedIn. And I think that for the purpose of this conversation, and probably what a lot of our audience would find useful, is the hiring of an acquisition manager specifically can be the kind of the case study that we use. But Dan, how did you get started with hiring your first full-time acquisition manager, and maybe what lessons did you learn?
2 quick points I have to drive home on everything you just said. Number one is you need to be making money and busy before hiring anyone. All these books and podcasts about owning a business, not working in one. Well, that's only applicable once you're making money. Number one. Number two, about as you look at the process flow of the whole business, the constraint might not be what you thought. There were a couple times where there really was no constraint other than my own fear of spending more money on marketing. So you might very well find that's the case, where you have plenty of labor to take in the calls and data and so on, and you're just afraid to spend more money. And so that's where understanding the difference between spending money that's going to be multiplied, i.e., on marketing where you get a return, versus actually spending money, are two very different things. So I just wanted to add that. Now, to the next point, what do you do? Well, the first acquisition manager I hired, I just threw it up on Indeed, didn't have clear SOPs or KPIs for the role. And that first hire did go quite well, but without, going into how lucky I got there, you need to have a very clear sheet outlining everything this person's going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, what they're responsible for, how they're going to be held accountable, but also how that's going to get them to their goals, right? And so this is a two-way street. When I am hiring now, of course, I share it with my network. I'll post on social media. I'll post on Indeed, but I have a detailed KPI sheet for the role that outlines how many calls they're going to make a week, how many offers, all the expectations, just like any arrangement, whether it's with your contractor, tenant, or your employee. Very, very clear expectations. And I even like to put, hey, if you enjoy talking to people, chasing, closing sales, right, you're going to like this role. Whereas if you don't, you're going to hate this role. I want to immediately push away the people that aren't right and attract the people that are potentially right, and be very, very, very clear on what the role entails and what the expectations are. So good and bad. But go ahead, Mason.
Oh, yeah. And I think you're right on. And it goes back to what we said of when you're actually examining your business and mapping out the entire process of what your whole business is, it's going to be making that job, it's going to make that job description process so much easier. And whenever you're looking at jobs of everyone has been applying for jobs and looking at the job descriptions, there's some that outline everything. And I think putting the KPIs and the metrics that you're going to be held accountable for in the job description is going to make it so where the people that are actually reading it, and we'll get to screening in a second, if people haven't read the job description and within it skills and tasks required of being detail oriented, right off the bat, they're not going to be a good fit because they didn't even read the job description. They're going to fail you in your business because they're going to miss things. But if you, at the beginning, which is why we encourage documentation to the nth degree of all of your standard operating procedures, your entire business process flow, recording yourself as you're doing these phone calls and doing market analysis or whatever it is within your own business, the more you can document and record yourself and map it out at the beginning, the more simplicity you're going to have, or the easier it's going to be whenever you're actually hiring these people and creating that description. And a lot of states, they're requiring a lot of transparency with the hiring process. Colorado changed in the last handful of years we're one of the first states in the country that says you have to post what the salary expectations of a job is. And so with that desire of transparency, everyone wants to know how much you're going to make, what the actual job is. The more you can put it in that initial job description is crucial because, and the reason we're hammering this point home is it's part of the management process and keeping your employees accountable, where you can say, look, dude, your job description says that you are required in your job description. It says you're required to make 1,000 cold calls a week. You've been doing 600 and it's not going to work that way. And so the more documentation you have from the HR legal standpoint, the better it is. But so you've got a job description, you post it on LinkedIn, you share it with your network, you post it on Indeed. Some of these services cost money, some don't. And once again, you'll be surprised if you share this with your network on social media, how many people are interested in whatever job it is, especially because they say, oh, my skill sets match what that job says. What's next? I assume it's the interview process, the general screening process. Dan, how do you feel like you approach that from an initial screening?
Sure. So taking some of what I just said about the posting, I bring it to the interview where I'm very direct about both the pros and the cons of the job, who will like it and who won't. And so, with the acquisition manager role, again, I just drill home, look, Mason, if you're not the type of person that likes to be on the phone and likes to talk to people, you're going to hate this. I will literally say that to them. And I think just trying to disqualify, just like in taking a lead, in our land business, same idea where you want to really qualify them and be absolutely clear about the role and setting expectations. And then assuming that seems to be in line and they are the right person, well, I want to dive into what they're looking for and what their goals are and make sure that the role is aligned with that. We'll get into this later once we're talking about actually having hired them, but making sure it's really clear that they see how those day-to-day KPIs, those week-to-week KPIs align with their goal. And a couple other things along with this, just little things like, do they do exactly what they say they do when they're going to do it? Are they early to the interview? Do they get me back any and all documentation I ask for when they say they're going to do it? That's really important. We use that with tenants too. And then I like to use the culture index survey. That has been tremendously helpful. When I have ignored that, it has been right every time. When it has said they're a good fit, it has been right every time. So depending on where you're at, in your business, how many employees you have, that may be worth looking into. And then usually it's 2 to 3 interviews. I had on this last hire, my other acquisition guy talked to him to make sure he was a fit in his opinion, that he would be cohesive with the team. And yeah, that's I'll let you take it from there. Those are the brain dump with the first few things that come to mind.
No, that's great. And I think that going into it, there's a lot of very easy tests that you can do at the very beginning of they apply for the job. You can have them answer a few initial screening questions as soon as they apply for the job. And when you schedule the interview, making sure they show up on time for the interview, and various things of you can do that initial interview yourself as the manager that's hiring them, and give them some tasks of, hey, check out this resource, check out this training material, and get back to me by Tuesday of next week with your thoughts on it. And if they don't do that, you already know they're not going to be a good fit because follow up and follow through is not their strong suit. But during the actual interview process, look at the job description and ask questions relevant to it. You can ask all the standard questions just to see who they are as a person. And that's one of the best questions that I start every interview with, of tell me about yourself. And it's amazing how many people are taken aback by just that simple question. And I find that odd. And I find it a great indication of the confidence they have in who they are as a person, whether or not they're going to fit well into my organization. But I think specifically, asking a certain amount of technical related questions related to the job description to see if they researched your company, the position, and the general skills required, but then a lot of behavioral based questions. I think people get confused whenever they're doing interviewing, and especially attempting to make it evidence-based interviewing, where don't ask, Dan, what would you do in this situation? You need to reframe the question and say, Dan, tell me about a time where you were working for a manager and you felt like the manager was instructing you poorly and you had to, have a confrontation with them, or you thought that you had a better process, or, don't lead them too much. That's a bad example, but ask them about questions in a behavioral way of tell me about a time when. And then, as Dan said, whether you're in a large organization or a solo entrepreneur, I mean, that was something that I implemented at the last hospital I was at, was peer interviewing of, if employees have lateral counterparts, the lateral counterparts that you trust in the organization are people that should be involved in the interview process because they're going to be spending the most time with them. And they're going to get a different pulse than the manager will. A lot of times, so many times in business, people will present so well to the manager, and then they get on the floor, or they get in the office, and they act like a complete schmuck just because they, are like, oh, well, the boss isn't here. This is actually who I am. Everyone can put a face on. So having that peer interview or non-biased interview of, Dan and I have both interviewed people for each other of, I don't work in Dan's business. I want him to succeed, obviously, but they're going to be like, who is this outside source? They're going to potentially get a better picture of them than the person would give to the hiring manager. So I think that's kind of the main points. Look up evidence-based interviewing. AI is a great resource. Plug in your job description into ChatGPT or Google Gemini and say, hey, can you create 20 interview questions with 10 of them being behavioral based for this? And you'd be amazed what resources are out there and what AI can come up with to help you in that process. But say you make it through it, potentially personality tests, they've gone through all the interview, they've hired, they're onboarding. That's where we're at now. And I think this is one of the most crucial parts, because now it's your time to show that you're meeting the employees' expectations of interviews, and hiring and managing employees as a two-way street. So, Dan, they've come onto the organization. What are you feeling? What's next? How do you start training them?
Yeah, so day one, I will have prepped them for this, but I like to talk through their goals and then clearly show how their day-to-day and week-to-week KPIs help them get to those goals financially, right? This is so important that those numbers you're holding them accountable to every week or month are aligned with what they're trying to accomplish. And it's not just, the teacher-student dynamic. Well, my teacher, like kids with my teacher said or my boss said. You don't want that, right? You want to be on the same team driving the ship towards a specific goal, right? And so to that end, I have KPI sheets, both weekly and daily, that they fill out, how many calls that they make, offers made, so on and so forth. And I show them how those day-to-day lead measures get them the lag measure of closing deals and ultimately making money, so that their interests are very aligned with mine. And then along with all that, I have a thorough set of SOPs built out that gives them the tools and the knowledge to do this, right? We have videos, training videos on everything, resource sheets, contact lists, so on and so forth. And this is where what Mason said about this being a two-way street is so important. If you go hire a killer salesperson. They do everything they're supposed to do, but then you have shitty systems and processes and you don't give them the resources that they need, then they are absolutely not going to stick with you. And so having all this prepared ahead of time where they can just plug and play and anything they need, there's a video on it, is really, really important. And then, kind of as a corollary to all this and a corollary to day one, having whether it's weekly or twice weekly meetings to check in with them, answer questions where they can give feedback and you can help them iterate and get better and better and train them continually is really, really important. But I'll pause there and let you take it, Mason.
No, I think you're right on. And I think that's the point within this section of the show talking about training and orientation that we want to hammer home is it's a two-way street. And that's where a lot of the fear, I think, comes from hiring your first employee is all of the same fears that you have as you're starting a business or you're an entrepreneur or you're in a leadership position in corporate America is, can I really do this? Am I going to fail them? Am I going to be able to make payroll of, man, when I was 15 or 16 working at a pool store in the Woodlands, Texas, there were times where my organization couldn't pay me. And it was kind of great because when I went off to college, I was getting paychecks for the next 9 months because they were so behind on payroll. But you can't, I mean, that was illegal, obviously, but child labor, basically. They could get away with a lot. But that right there is one of the biggest fears. And so when I was at the hospital, I would be the first person to speak to every single new hire group. And I would give my spiel about the organization and the culture and everything like that. But what I said is to every employee of, I think you're going to hear a lot this week about what your responsibilities are and what your job is and all of this HR nonsense that you have to go through and train. But I want to start off with what my responsibilities are to you as a manager. And I would say it was 4 things, which is the first one is to clarify what your responsibilities are. People want to do well and do good in a job environment. And it's so often, especially in large corporations, where they just don't understand what they're supposed to be doing every day. They sit down at their desk and they're like, okay, I don't actually know what to do. And going back to the detailed job descriptions and all of the KPIs and that everyone is going to be held accountable for, that right there is so crucial so they can go back on that resource and they have their manager saying, hey, Dan, this is what you're responsible for on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis, monthly, quarterly, etc. Second to that is my responsibility to you is to give you the resources that you need to be able to do the job. And so that goes into the training material, it goes back to that job description once again, and some of the silly stuff beyond training and just what you're being held accountable for of, are you going to be cold calling? Do you have a phone that works? Are you going to be sitting in a desk all day? Do you have a comfortable chair? Do you have a computer that works? All of the actual systems and tools that people need is all encompassing in that second point of resources you need to be able to do your job, which is the manager's responsibility to provide. Third to that is ongoing coaching and feedback of, okay, you've given them the resources, you've clarified the job description. They're not going to be able to do the job as well as you, especially if you're in the small environment, because you have 50,000 reps, they have 3. So give them a break, but provide that ongoing coaching and feedback. And like Dan said, have those regular meetings teaching with them. Ask them what they're missing. Ask them where you've, humble yourself. Have humility in the conversations of what have I missed? What gaps in documentation are there? I know, Dan, you have at the end of your daily SOP that I adapt, daily, SOP sheet that I've adapted in my organization is, was there anything that you didn't know how to answer? And so being able to have those conversations and provide feedback and say, hey, you're doing really great at this. You are struggling at this. Let's dive into that and figure out why. That's kind of your third responsibility as manager. And then the fourth one is going back to the fear point of, it's my responsibility to make sure this organization is running and operating of, we have enough money coming in so I can pay you for the work that you're doing. I'm meeting all of the requirements, and healthcare is very simple to say, hey, hospital can shut down if you're not managing it properly. Same thing with any business, even at a small level. If you're not managing it properly, it'll get shut down and they lose their job. And if they lose their job, they can't feed their family. So you should take this very, very seriously. But that's kind of the spiel that I gave to all my employees, and I try to reiterate that every manager should give and say and assume that responsibility to their employees.
Yeah, a lot of great points there, Mason. Just a couple things to tack on from failures in my business, where make sure, especially if your people are working remotely, that, unless they're just the most independent of personality types, they need human interaction, right? Collaboration. And so with my newest hire, we do morning meetings every single day. And it's not always me. 2 days a week, it's him and my other acquisition manager. And 3 days a week, it's me and him. But this was something I made a mistake with, where I left them on their own too much. And very few people can do that. And they need just the human interaction, the encouragement, the recognition. This is another thing I failed on miserably, guys. Make sure you tell them good job. You give them feedback. They want to hear that. Something I've been really bad about and working on. And I think something that has worked well for me is I always tell them there's no ego in our business, in our company. You can tell me if I tell you I'm going to do something, if I don't do it, you better call me and text me, Dan, where is this? And so I always say I don't want this to be the stiff, traditional sort of organization where I treat you like a child and there's a big ego with the boss. None of that crap here. One of my guys was asking about going to a doctor's appointment. I said, look, just let me know. You don't have to ask. Again, I don't want this to be a rigid traditional structure. And so those couple of things have served me very well. Last thing I wanted to say, if you've never had a W-2 employee, something that I didn't know when I hired my first one, I ran payroll for the first time and it was higher than the number of what I was paying them. And what is this? Why? Well, just an FYI, if you've never ran payroll for W-2 employees, you get taxed additionally on every dollar you pay your employees. So just something to be aware of. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Mason, anything more to say on the topic?
Yeah, to go back to your first point of, if you've never managed people or you haven't managed them in this environment, coming up with your managerial style it's really important. There's a lot of different terms out there in books you've read of, servant leader and authoritarian, and it's important for you where you are the culture of an organization. And I think that people will stray away from the soft stuff related to business building of the mission and vision and values of the organization. And that's the most important part of what culture are you attempting to create here. I think we can all agree on, I think so often you think that the technical side of management or the technical skills necessary to complete a job, people will say, oh, that's the most important. But what I have seen time and time and time again, it's not the smartest people I know that are the most wealthy people. It's the people that are great at soft skills and interpersonal communication. And so that's why culture is so critical. And I think, as Dan said, where he doesn't want to be the stiff corporate boss, and he doesn't want to just have his employees inundated with meetings constantly that serve no purpose and paperwork that needs to be done and check boxes that need to be completed for the sake of check boxes being completed. And I think that right there is an approach that I failed at coming into this role, where I was the exact same way of, I've left corporate America. I've left the most strict and regulatory enforced industry that exists in the United States in healthcare. I want to be the laid back, no micromanagement whatsoever. Let's be accountable for ourselves. Let's hang out. Let's chill. Let's just get the job done. And that works really great for a very, very, very specific subset of employees that you're probably not going to find. Those are the unicorns out there. And whenever you meet them, you're taken aback by how great of employees they are, because all of the things that you outlined in your job description, you don't need to hold them accountable for because they've already done them. But with that being said, for the other 99.99% of employees that are out there, you need to hold them accountable for that stuff. And those daily meetings and weekly meetings and required spreadsheets that they need to fill out, it's not micromanagement. It's a two-way street of accountability of, I want you to succeed in this position. This is the steps for you to succeed in this position. It is not me micromanaging. It is documentation of, hey, if you're doing everything that I've said to do and you're not having success, Is it a process issue or is it a person issue? Are you the right person for the job or the wrong person for the job? And I think that kind of brings me, to the next thing that we're talking about, which we'll get into KPIs and SOPs and the requirements of, how you effectively manage in a second, but it's hire slow, fire quick. Because if at the beginning they've passed the hiring process, which shouldn't be overly cumbersome, but they have made it through, you bring them onto the organization, you train them effectively, and they're just not doing the job, rip that Band-Aid off as quick as you can, because they are not going to get better. If you can look in the mirror and say, I have done everything in my ability for someone to come into my organization and succeed, and this person is not succeeding, means they are not the right person for the job. And you can determine that very, very quickly. Dan, I think you've had some short stints with employees. If you want to talk a little bit about, hey, I don't know, someone that you maybe should have fired sooner, or someone that quit quickly, or anything related to that, to add anecdote to the story that we're telling.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the first things I should have done, thinking about failures, is better established all the paperwork around what they're responsible for, what just documenting everything. As Mason always said, I needed a better job description, better time off policy, all of that. I was a bit lax with my first couple hires, and so I never will be again, where there's a very clear job description, time off policy, benefits, all that, and it's all signed up front. So just everything's very above board, so to speak, and it's all documented. And yeah, if they consistently aren't hitting their metrics, and I've provided them with as much coaching and feedback as possible, made myself available to them, and they're not asking, right? They're not asking more questions or bringing the problems they're having to me, which I've had a couple of times, or, they're leaving tasks undone, that sort of thing in the CRM, even though we've talked about this over and over again. You've got to just rip the Band-Aid off. And so kind of as a corollary to the whole documentation thing and being able to cautiously rip that Band-Aid off, depending on what state you're in, it's a lot like tenant landlord laws, where there's some that you need to be very careful because the tenant can easily take advantage of you. And same thing here, where you have to be careful about how you fire people. And so something that Mason introduced to me a couple of years ago was the performance improvement plan. And so as soon as they are not hitting their metrics, and you've already talked about it with them, they know they need to be hitting them, you've given them all the feedback and resources you can, you put them on a performance improvement plan, which clearly documents everything that they have not been doing that they're supposed to be doing. And this needs to align with the job description, right? And you and them sign it after you review it together. You say, hey, here are the problems, and here is what we need to do to fix them. And it very clearly documents, hey, if these items are not done by this date, disciplinary action will be taken up to and potentially including letting you go. And so if you have that really helps your case if anything should go wrong when you do let them go, or unemployment calls you and is asking about what happened. So yeah, there's a number of times where I hate managing people, and they weren't hitting their metrics, but they were doing okay and was making a lot of money elsewhere. And so I just kind of swept it under the rug because I hated dealing with employees, and that came to bite me in the ass later. So really, to Mason's point, just sooner rather than later, put them on the performance improvement plan, and don't let things slip up front and set an expectation of, oh, I can get away with not hitting my metrics. He's not even paying attention. You can't let that be the norm. I made that mistake multiple times. Thankfully, doing great with the couple acquisition guys I have now, but I had to learn that the hard way. So yeah, Mason, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think a few points there. And it goes back to the beginning of when you're ready to hire, you need to have enough money in the bank to effectively hire. And unless you have completed high-level HR training and, understand all of the laws within your state, you need to have the money to hire an attorney, or through your payroll processing. I use ADP. You use
Gusto.
A lot of these services will have built-in HR departments that you can hire to get these documents and have it so where you have that PTO policy whenever people come on board, and, FMLA and understanding unemployment insurance and all of these different things that you can hire a group to get take care of, and it's actually not that expensive to do. I think that's really crucial. So you need to be able to spend the money on that so you hire people properly, because as Dan said, depending on the state that you're in, even if you're in an at-will state, Colorado's an at-will state, but it's an extremely employee-friendly state, you can get hit with the wrongful termination suits. Potentially, if you do it to the wrong person, you can get hit with Office of Civil Rights suits or discrimination suits, or depending on there's ambulance chaser employees out there, and you need to be very careful with that. And I'm not saying to live or operate in fear. That's why documentation is so crucial and so important. And on the PIP, or the performance improvement plan, whenever you hire someone, it's their introductory, it's their orientation period, and you need to clarify that. And typically, it's the first 90 days. There's actually a great book called The First 90 Days that's about the orientation process and establishing just how you can onboard or come onto an organization, what you should do. But regardless of that, it should essentially be they come into the organization with a performance improvement plan already signed and documented of, hey, for these first 2 weeks, all you're doing is training. You're going to be practicing, you're going to do some shadowing, you're going to go through all of the videos and SOPs. There's really great ways to make sure that people know it, from teaching people to having them teach you and regurgitate the information and take tests on it, depending on how much you want them to study and understand everything. And I mean, and do as we say, not as we do. I don't have my acquisition managers doing tests, but I should have. Hey, what utilities are required for a property, and have them test on it, because it's all in the documentation that they should have gone through. And I think having that at the beginning is important. But whenever in that once they're done with training, if you operate as if they screw up over the next 30 to 60 days, get rid of them right away. And by establishing at the beginning, hey, your first 90 days, it's an introductory period, it's an orientation period. Depending on how you structure it, you can actually have it of, hey, your first 90 days, you are going to be making minimum wage. You're not going to be making any commission or anything like that. You're going to be making this fixed amount, and then you can move it into a salary plus commission role after they hit it. I mean, there's so many ways that you can structure this. Talk to your attorney, talk to your HR specialist regarding it. But yeah, I think making that great first impression whenever someone comes on board through your orientation process, through your training materials, through how you set the standard of accountability as a manager is absolutely crucial. But at this point, we're rocking and rolling, assuming they've made it past 90 days or so. This is where it is on you to stay on top of things, because it's really easy to be really great at something right at the beginning. It's like summer's coming. I'm going to diet every day, and I'm going to get that six pack. I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week. And then you're hungover and you're tired and you're exhausted. You're scattered in your business. You're too busy. You're not doing the daily meetings anymore. Dan, how do you feel like you effectively remain consistent in management and holding people to the standards that they've been hired to do?
Well, part of that is having an accountability sheet for yourself, just like the KPI sheets that we use for our employees. Mason and I meet on Mondays. We have our own SOPs and KPIs, or excuse me, just KPIs that we hold each other accountable to hitting it. So for me, staying on top of my guys and managing them, it's on the calendar, recurring, and it never goes away. So that's a big part of it. And kind of as a corollary to that, I think what you put on our note sheet here of having a clear path for progression for the employees helps them stay on top of it themselves and not get jaded and bored if they can see how they're working towards a bigger goal in the future, along with the shorter term, smaller goals. If they know, hey, down the road, I'm going to be working these much larger deals and add, 5X to what I can make on one deal, that's pretty exciting. All right. And again, going back, if they know how their KPI sheet gets them to those bigger goals, it alleviates some of that burden of you having to do it. But yeah, I think simply put, it's just having standards and accountability for yourself, just like you do for your employees.
No, that's great. Another book recommendation kind of on this, specifically related to KPIs. And in the book, it's called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. It's Measure What Matters by John Doerr. John Doerr is a venture capitalist. He invested in Google at the beginning, and he has helped turn around some of the biggest organizations in the world. And brilliant man that has implemented this process of the objective of, okay, we need to make $1 million this year. And the key results being, I need to cold call 1,000 people a week. I need to do all of these things that tie to it, which is where the KPIs need to measure up into a greater KPI. And I'm not trying to make the point of, you can keep going down the organizational rabbit hole and, it's turtles all the way down or KPIs all the way down of connecting everything to everything, but it should serve the greater purpose. And it goes back to what Dan is saying of, you need to hold yourself accountable and have those own metrics that you're seeing that you can have your employees be connected to at the organizational level. And what Dan mentioned at the very beginning of this, of talking about an alignment of incentives and making sure that your employees have SOPs KPIs that are aligned, and KPIs is key performance indicators, in case we hadn't mentioned that before, that are aligned to their compensation, what their goals in the organization are, and what your goals for hiring someone is. So where each employee is different. There's some of us that want to manage multiple billions of dollars in a private equity firm, and there's some of us that want to make $75,000 a year and work from 8 to 5 every day and have the same thing that they do every day, no matter what. And you need to make sure that if your employee has those goals or desires to move up into a managerial position, that's the beauty of being the small business owner of, okay, I'm bringing you on, you're my first hire, you're my acquisition manager. Even though you're not managing any people, you're managing a process. But do you have aspirations to get into management? Do you enjoy what I might not like enjoying? Because if you make enough money, what's going to happen is that capital restraint that we talked about at the beginning of capital will eventually become a restraint for most people in most businesses. Hey, if you help me make a ton of money, we're going to need to bring on more acquisition managers. And I want you to be the person that oversees them, and I'll promote you into vice president of acquisitions or director of acquisitions, and make sure that you're checking in, not daily with these people on what their goals are, what their 5 to 10 year goals are, but quarterly of, hey, are you doing something every day that is allowing the organization to get to this point so that we can help you fulfill your goals and your dreams? And that might sound like soft foo-foo stuff to a lot of people, but that's how you hire employees for the long term. There's certain employees, they're going to churn and burn in 3 years, and that's super common in the sales world. But if you can bring on a long-term employee that's going to be with you for the next decade, think about how much knowledge that person's going to have in your business 10 years from now, when instead of having 2 employees, you have 20 employees.
Yeah, no. Lots of good points there, and I love the esoteric references that probably only you and I get there regarding the turtles. But moving on, Mason, you've got your hire going. You're managing them effectively. They've got clear goals for the future, and they see how what they're doing every day aligns to that. Anything else that you'd like to say about managing people for the long term, keeping them incentivized, and ultimately, keeping them all driving towards similar goal or their company goal?
Yeah, and I'll hop onto the pedestal for a bit longer, and I think this is a good point to essentially summarize this in an evidence-based way. So, I've mentioned 2 books already: The First 90 Days and Measure What Matters, which is related to the orientation process, and then the KPI process, respectively. But the best book I've ever read on leadership and management, if you were to just read one book, it's called The Leadership Challenge. And it walks through essentially the 10 steps of how to be an effective leader in an organization. Because, as soft as it sounds, there is a difference between leadership and management, and people will leave or stay in organizations because of the leadership or the manager. That can drive people to go work for you, where I can make a lot of calls in the healthcare industry where I know that people will come work for me no matter where I'm at a facility, which thank God I'm not in that world anymore. But to quickly kind of run through it, it starts with model the way. And within that, it's clarify values and set the example. So just like we're talking about, of be the type of employee within the organization that your employees want to be, and do that by clarifying what's important to you, of there can be great ethics in business and show that of, hey, we're not trying to scam anyone. We're not trying to be fraudulent in this business. We're trying to do the right thing by everyone, and then set the example and show your employees that. Next is inspire a shared vision of, I tell everyone of, yeah, I've got this land business that Dan and I have now partnered on to create a land funding business, which is the stepping stones to the creation of a private equity firm, and share that with people because it gets people excited. And, envision the future, talk about the future, and enlist others in your vision, because people will say, oh, yeah, I mean, this is great as an acquisition role, but eventually, man, we'll be buying hospitals, we'll be buying restaurants or whatever. Third section in the book is challenge the process. So Dan and I have created our own businesses, and neither of us are self-certain in the way that we've created the business and the processes associated with them of it's the perfect way to do it. Start off by following it, but challenge it. Try a different script for cold calling once you've had success and see if it can get better. And take risks of, hey, if you think there's a better way to do it, approach your manager in ideally a structured way to see if we can constantly improve the organization. Of Dan and I are constantly doing process improvement within our own company, but who's going to be better at it of managing the processes or improving the processes and acquisitions is our acquisition manager. So don't just be, a robot in the position. Constantly look for ways to take risks and improve the business. Fourth point is enable others to act, which is foster collaboration and strengthen others. Of you want your employees and the people in your organization to feel empowered to make decisions and to act on behalf of the company in whatever way is set forth in the standard operating procedures and job description, so they take ownership of it. And I mean, it goes back into the fear of the reason it's so scary in this entrepreneurial world of hiring people and firing people and everything like that is a lot of the times it's your own money. You saved up a bunch of money to start this business, and it's your own money or it's your own livelihood. And so the more collaboration you can have and have them bought into that vision and seeing it themselves as a part of the business is huge. And then the last point, which is probably Dan's least favorite, is encourage the heart. To recognize contributions and celebrate the value and victories in an organization. Of write people thank you notes. I can't tell you the power of a handwritten thank you note, especially if you're in an in-person environment. But sometimes we just need a pat on the back of, hey, you're doing a really great job and I appreciate what you're doing. And if that sounds uncomfortable to say, maybe it's because your parents didn't love you enough and you're not used to that. And but hearing that, sometimes a lot of us will be like, whatever, it's just I'm doing my job, but it really feels good inside. But that's the quick, dirty summary of the Leadership Challenge, which I encourage everyone to read. But I hope we've provided a decent overview of the initial decision-making process to bring on an employee, to evidence-based leadership and hiring and firing and kind of everything in between, in as quick of an episode as we could for this very, very lengthy and important process.
Yeah. The only thing I would add, or just to summarize, is really learn from our mistakes and implement this stuff ahead of time. If you're on the verge of hiring, you don't have clear KPIs and SOPs set up, take an extra week and do it. It'll save you a lot of headache down the road. And then ultimately, once you do this right, you have productive employees. It's just a cash printing machine where you put money in and you get, you put $1 in, you get 5 or 10 out. So when done right, it's really cool. It's fun to see people grow. So I think that's it. Mason, anything else you'd like to say before wrapping up?
No, other than this takes longer than it seems. And I think that's something that Dan and I have to remind ourselves a lot is this isn't going to happen in a few months. It's going to take years and years and years to effectively build and scale an organization, especially as you're bringing on employees. So it might take 2 years of you operating your business by yourself and another 3 years with 2 employees and another 5 years before you get to above 10. And that's okay. It's sometimes better to take your time and grow slowly and cleanly than it is to grow too fast, because that's why most businesses don't last more than 3 years. And usually it's because they grew too fast, they put too much overhead. So even though this episode is about hiring employees, recognize it might not be time in your organization. if you're not making a bunch of money, don't go hire a social media manager. That's not going to help you start making money right off the bat. But if you guys have any interest in learning more about what it takes to run and effectively manage, especially a land acquisition sales and development business, reach out to us. We appreciate you guys listening. This is Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkost with the Big Picture Blueprint signing off.